one of the most standout stats in the history of the minor championship. Alan Kerins played and never pucked the ball once. Goalie in the
Fact, as a goalie, didn't even puck it out.
Oh, buddy, what a stat! Thanks for bringing that one up, Christy. Hello, and welcome to the Hurling Show. Coming in from just outside Ennis, we have Christy O'Connor on the big screen. Christy, how are you doing?
Great stuff, Gizzy. Yeah, all good.
All good. There's a nice little. It's the club is up there behind JC. Nice poster. And any other books? They're all just team photos and that, is it?
Yeah, a few Clare minor team up there actually. Flanagan's team. Picture Gerlock Nan, picture Tommy Quaid. So yeah.
Oh, bye.
Don't get to show them off too often, Gizzy. So yeah. Finally getting an earring, you know.
That's what stirs you when you're writing those pieces, is it? You look up at Ger and you're like, right, this is it now. We're going for broke. And in studio, I'm delighted to be joined by Alan Kerins. Alan, great to have you in.
Thank you, Gizzy.
How are you doing?
Great. Can't complain.
You're busy, I imagine.
Very, but great.
Three young ones.
3 ones, yeah, all under 6. So it's a busy household, no more than most, but more than yourself. It's you know the joys of it.
Yeah, you're not much of a slouch though when it comes to outside the house either. You've got plenty of projects on the go, as best I know. Anyway, there's always a few things burning. What are you up to at the moment?
We've a lot of big projects on the line. We've a big cycle coming up with Kirby Engineering Group. Going from the Limerick, called the Kirby Way, going from the Limerick to Galway office, then Galway to Dublin. In September, we have a big match coming in Africa. We can't say too much more about that, but we'll have the first ever kind of all-star game, inter-county game in Kenya in November.
Lovely.
It hasn't been launched yet, but it's a very exciting project where the players are going to be able to leave a massive legacy behind them.
It's always one of the things that I notice about all the things that you do. It's not ever like sometimes I it's not a case of thinking locally necessarily. I just maybe see something in a small area, and then when I chat to you about the different projects, it's like on a global scale. Like you think big and you go after it at that level, and you get it through. I guess once you get experience of running big projects, then you just have got that capability, and people trust it, and you can make it happen then, eh?
Yeah, I suppose a lot of people who I work with say I have too many ideas, but it's trying to follow through on some of those. I love those big ideas, those big creative projects where you can bring a group of people together to make a massive impact, and you have great memories and great experiences yourself, but you also leave a good legacy behind you in terms of society and the places you visit. So
yeah,
and you know when you get people involved, people are unbelievably generous, and particularly the sports guys they're fantastic with their time, and they're such positive role models. Having them involved, and that just makes it a lot easier for the corporates and for the communities they come from to get involved as well.
I can see, I saw down in Carrintoohil, we did a climb in Carrintoohil. What year was that?
2014.
2014. And I was working with Off the Ball at the time, and I was kind of the liaison, the go-between, and I was saying to the lads, we'll climb the mountain and we'll be back down at, 5 o'clock, and then we'll go on the show at 7, and we have this array of incredible. Peter Canavan was up there, and Seamus Moynihan, and I was like, couldn't wait for the show, and I got back, and I was kind of on the way back down. I was kind of hurrying the lads a bit because I could see that the day was slipping a little bit, and I got back over into Inch, the pub in Inch where we had it, and it was, I'd say, 6:15 maybe, and I rounded the corner, and there was a big tent up outside, and Marky and Ger and Joe and the boys were standing there, Donny Mahoney, and they were like, so, where is everybody? And I was the first by a good bit, and like by 5 to 7, I was going live at 7. It was still like 5 people there, and I said, "Okay, well, you jump up at the start." And all of a sudden, then one by one they came. And Ryan McHugh came on, and it was brilliant. But I can imagine, the logistics.
But the whole story of that day was we'd 32 medals, one from each county, going to the top of Carrintoohil and Sam Maguire. So it was called Sam to the Summit. And with Micheál Merhertig, who was 82 at the time, or 84.
82 at the time.
And it was a roasting hot day. And so we Peter Canavans, Jeff Allens, Declan Browns, and different people from different counties. And I think 1927 medal was there from Kildare. Mick Loftus' granddaughter climbed that day as well from the Mayo medal.
Caroline Crowley climbed it from Wexford from the 1915 to 18 team.
And there's loads of supporters fundraised to climb with all the medals and the superstars that were climbing. But Micheál was coming down for the day, and I thought Micheál was just going to head up to this creek and then come back. And it was a roasting hot day, and I said to him, as I passed him, I said, are you going to go to the top, Micheál? That's the intention, Alan, that's the intention. He said, and I said, not a hope at 82, because I knew it was a good 7-8 hour climb. But we thought the money shot was going to be all the jerseys with the medals on the top of the mountain.
The cross.
But we got word that Micheál was coming up the Devil's Ladder with one of the guides, and took hold. You got to hold. This will be special because when he's 82, he's going to lift the cup here. This is the money shot, and it was probably one of the most it's one of the most special moments if you were there. The whole crowd at the top of the mountain,
the parting of the waters,
and they gave him a guard of honour at the top of where the cross is. He got the cup and he lifted it, and the whole place erupted, and there was a lot of people in tears. And he gave the most amazing oration at the top of that mountain. I think he knew this. Like, he may not be back there again at his age, and to be there with the 32 medals and the Sam Maguire, it was a special moment, really.
I guess it turned into something that you couldn't have almost imagined. Like, you think it's going to be one thing, but then a moment like that happens. And he was there, I felt it. It was, my body was alive up there at that moment, and Micheál was coming up, and we all got this chance to appreciate and celebrate Micheál Hurting and his influence in all of our lives as well. You know, it was really...
it was really one of those special moments that it was an unintended moment because we didn't expect it. But and I said to him when I got down, because we were all broke up, and Stephen MacDonald from Armagh, he was crippled, and Mickey Linden, and we were going to Africa a week later, remember that?
Yeah.
And we were all really sore, and we were in our 30s or whatever age we were at the time. And I said to him, how did you get to the top and come back down? And he said, he didn't look at the top. It was a wonderful piece of advice. He said, I never looked at the summit. I just put one foot in front of the other, and it took my time, and I knew eventually I would get there once I put one foot in front of the other, and I got there.
That's my intention, Alan.
That's my intention. Yeah. So it was. So that he was the reason. And we all made it back in France. We all had a great night.
We did. Had a great night. There was 1 foot. It's 1 foot in front of the other for Clare. Christy. From the start of the year, they certainly weren't on too many people's radar. We had Derek Conan on early, and I could get a sense that he was very confident. Everybody was looking to Waterford, and he didn't find that a plausible direction for things to go at all. He seemed to know that something was happening in Clare. Are you surprised at their emergence this year, or is this expected?
A bit of both, Derek. Diarmuid, you know, I suppose really from a Clare perspective, you know, there's an awful lot of experience still in the squad, right? You know, okay, they won an All-Ireland. It's back since 13 since they won it, but there's still an awful lot of quality. And, you know, I suppose even you look at the level Tony Kelly's hit in the last 2-3 years in particular, he's, you know, gone to a completely different level, even though he was a sensational underage player. So, I suppose last year, you look at who they didn't have last year: Peter Duggan, Shane O'Donnell, David Fitzgerald didn't make the matchday squad, matchday 26 against Cork last year. You look at how the three of them, how they've played. They're all three are in all-star form. You know, that even I suppose even just the way that Brian has even, I suppose, the way the team has evolved. You look at Keane Nolan, for example. You know, came in really good underage player. Played very well with his club last year, Smith O'Brien's, and they won the intermediate championship. He was a guy who came in and only made his debut against Waterford. You know, came in the Munster final, came in the last day after only a handful of minutes. You know, on Lee Chin, you know, played well. And I think that's just been a metaphor really for, I suppose, how Clare have gone, that they've been confident, they've, you know, no holds barred, they've gone out, they've expressed themselves. And look at, I suppose the biggest thing with Clare, I suppose everything is relative towards Limerick, and you kind of have to compare everyone to Limerick because they are the standard. And I think that, you know, they showed in the league in March and in the round robin in May, they're the one team that physically, you know, Limerick can't overpower, they can't, you know, dominate or bully. And, you know, there was so many occasions in that round robin game where, you know, Limerick looked to have Clare lads, you know, gobbled up on the tackle, or just looked to have them pinned in and ready to turn them over, and Clare were still able to extricate themselves from those challenges and, you know, physically able to survive in that maelstrom. So, I suppose the biggest thing, I suppose, with the two teams, with Clare and Limerick, you know, okay, they lost the Munster final, but you'd have to say that they've been the most consistent team along with Limerick.
Yeah.
You know, since the start of the championship, really good against Tip the first day, excellent against Cork the second day. You know, blew Waterford off the park. Waterford weren't at the races. You know, could have beaten Limerick in the round robin game. Could have beaten them in the Munster final. You know, like Saturday was always going to be a tricky, dangerous game. You know, for Clare, there was nobody in the county under any illusions about how, you know, dangerous it was, and that's the way it worked out. I suppose. Look, they just didn't play well there.
But is that all it is? It's an interesting line of commentary, because I know Tom Dempsey had was chatting about this after the game, and it is there's. I mean, I don't feel like it's patronising. I feel it's reflective of the nature of how both teams have performed. But it is this, like, it's a sticky game. It's like, you know, Wexford playing against Westmeath or Cork going up to Antrim. It's this feeling of like, well, we could get caught here on our journey somewhere else. And the coverage very much was along that lines. It was like very much about Clare not performing, as opposed to maybe being shut down, or Wexford haven't gotten their matchups right. And yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily have a question on it. It's an interesting dynamic after a game, I suppose. You see how Limerick have rewritten, or started doing it 4 or 5 years ago. They've rewritten how we see the game, and they didn't ask for permission to do that. They've just done it. Clare don't seem to have that defiance as much, but they're definitely putting their own stamp and their own, out of their sheer brilliance, it seems, they're putting their stamp on it. But there is something in, like, I feel like with the likes of Cian Nolan, like at the end you get that penalty and a black card and you've got a different finish. And is that, I guess you're going on form. That's what people do, isn't it? They go on form. They say, well, these are the form teams, and so a Wexford can come along and they can upset the form, but that's all they're ever really doing, as opposed to saying, well, this is a battle between two good teams, and you know, you give both their kind of their dues for their capabilities.
Yeah, and I think probably the best way to look at that, Gizzy, is like, I suppose you just see the way a championship evolves, right? And there's always going to be turning points. There's always going to be, you know, parts of the season where teams are going to play well. They're going to, you know, they're going to ride out tough periods. They're going to come back. And we'll say, I suppose, look at the big debate that is, I suppose, a big debate in the last couple of years has been the Munster Leinster, you know, I suppose, divide or comparison. And we'll say, you look at, now Galway are back in the semi final, you know, but if Cork had won on Saturday, like, you know, it would have been like three Munster teams in the semi final in last year. You had three Munster teams in the semi final in 18. In you know, would say you look at the last few All Ireland finals, you've had, you know, All Munster final last year, All Munster final in 2020, All Munster final in, you know, like, would say it looked like it would say, everyone would say that it's going to be an All Munster final again in the two Munster teams in the All Ireland final again this year. But like, you can look at Galway, for example, now, whereby, you know, like they're going in against Galway or going against Limerick, written off, you could say. You know, a lot of experience still in the team. Like, you could just compare with, say, for example, like Galway are better than Wexford. You know, you would have to say on the levels they've shown. You know, should have beaten them by more. You know, drew with them in Wexford Park. You know, played really well for 65 minutes. Wexford kind of caught them with a late surge.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, I suppose the Munster thing is, you look at the under 20, under 21. Like, you haven't had like, this year was the first time a Leinster team won the under 20 since 2011. So, you know, all like Cork, Tip, Waterford, Clare dominated that championship. And you know that then there is that question. Well, is Munster operating at a higher level than Leinster? Now, if you're to look at the teams that have, I suppose, won the All Irelands, you know, you've a Tip, like Limerick, Tip, Limerick. Since Galway won it in 17, you know, you've two teams that said in the final last year, two Munster teams. But you know, like, like this whole thing, you could say, is the Munster Championship a little bit overhyped? Like, is the standard as good? Like, you look at some of the games in Munster this year, you know, with the exception of Clare, Limerick obviously operating at a different level. Some of the performances were not good. You know, like, you could argue that in Leinster, is it down to the pitches are smaller? You know, the grounds are smaller. The atmosphere maybe isn't as electric as sometimes you'll have in Munster. So, like, there's all of this that feeds into it. And, like, you know, if you go back to your original question, Gizzy, like, about Wexford, like, of course Wexford are going to be a serious proposition for Clare. Like, there's been nothing in those games. Like, last year, the two teams played in a qualifier. Clare were well ahead. Wexford came with a late surge, almost caught them. And that's just the way the championship evolves. Because if you were to say, like, after Saturday, like, okay, that Limerick are well ahead of Galway, but like Galway will go into that game now, they'll be full of confidence. They've beaten Limerick in the league last year. They beat them in the Gaelic grounds this year. They kind of feel that they owe them one after the 2020 semi-final when, okay, Limerick were the better team, but Galway still had chances. Joe Canning went off injured that day. Colin Manning went off injured early with a hamstring. So this is just, I suppose, how the championship rolls, how it evolves. So, like, to go back again to your original question, I don't think there was anybody in Clare underestimating or, running Wexford down. But I suppose the narrative was that, look, at after such an incredible performance from Clare in the Munster final, when it looked like, let's be honest, you could say that it looked like these are the two best teams in the country. Now, could Clare reach that level again? No, don't think anybody expects them to reach that level again.
Well, they can only reach it against. They can only reach it against the best time. They can only reach it against the best team, can't they? Like, you can't. It's drawn out of you when the standard. Like, you can't draw that kind of a performance out, I don't think, unless you meet the level. Like, it's always going to be lesser. It's always going to be a lesser performance because your best comes out when the best is put in front of you. Like, every player says that about the best players they mark.
Yeah, but I think it's different as well, Diarmuid, in that, like, Clare Limerick is a massive local rivalry. It's a Munster final. Clare have won one since '98. There's all of that going on. There's the local, the players know each other so well. There isn't that same history and that same, I suppose, rivalry with Wexford. And, of course, it's going to be, the game on so many levels is going to be at a different level to what it was in the Munster final. So I think it's important to make that point, like that, I don't think there was anybody, in Clare or anybody who knows, was fully tuned in that was, running Wexford down or felt that, that they were at a much lower level than Clare. But I just think that, okay, Clare were the story because of the performance they had produced in the Munster final, and then Wexford, well, could Wexford take advantage of that? Maybe, I suppose Clare not operating at the same level. So, that was just the narrative. And I think in fairness, that's probably the way how the game worked out. That, like Clare, like Tony Kelly missed 3 frees at the very start. Like Clare's conversion rate was only 56%, but it was still really, really good and decisive when it mattered. And I think that's probably the way the game's rolled, in that Clare found a way when they had to. Now, you could argue that Wexford losing Rory O'Connor was a massive moment. Like Lee Chen should have had a black card, or Keane Nolan should have been black carded. Chen should have had a penalty with the game going into injury time, which would have, if he'd scored that, the game was level, 6 minutes to play. So, yeah, but I think, look at, there's people criticising Wexford that they couldn't close it out. But I think when you Alan and yourself will know a lot more about this, that, when a team collapses your platform so quickly and so, I suppose, devastatingly, like, it's harder to re-arrest that, to stall that momentum and to kind of get back on top. And, like, I would have even felt, for example, that, okay, you could say Chen, he won that ball at the end. He could have won a penalty, but I just felt like, if you look at the way the game had turned, Clare got a complete grip on puckouts. Like, the 4 of those 6 points they got 2 of them off Wexford puckouts. They got 2 of them off their own sharp puckouts. Wexford just needed somebody maybe to come out and win a ball, like even bring Chen out to the half-forward line to try and win a ball, just to try and stall it. Even that said, if you won a puck out, maybe just try and win a free. So yeah, look at just Clare. They whipped up that tide at just the right time and just submerged Wexford. And I suppose that was really the bottom line when it came down to it.
Yeah. I suppose one of the things, Alan, that I feel that it may reflect, and I think this has repercussions well beyond for Wexford, is it's almost like it's a little bit of poor mouthing almost. It's like, oh, we're not getting the recognition, and we're not getting the time from the vanguard of GA attitude, which is the Sunday game. Like that, it's all kind of funneled in through the Sunday game and then comes back out, and it's supposedly reflective of the GA landscape or whatever. And we're kind of saying, or Tom Dempsey at least is saying, and plenty of others with him were saying that, well, why aren't we being given the respect, And I felt, and it's a line that I'm not sure where to kind of, I haven't really fallen on either side of it yet, because I don't think it matters too much, is that when it came to, we'll say 10 minutes to go and Wexford are 6 points up, if there is a chink in the attitude of poor us, we're not getting the, that, I know that exists after the fact, but it also is just something that vibrates when something happens that was already there before. And so when Wexford go to 6 points, and like they did in 2019 against Tipperary, they went to 6 points, and all of a sudden the finish line is up ahead, and like Micheál Hurtig is not looking up at the top, he's looking step by step. And if you have that little bit of a chink of the thing that I think that Limerick totally have done away with, the thing that I think the likes of Kerry and I think Antrim in some respects are doing it, but a lot of teams need to step into, is not worrying about what anybody else thinks or how much credit you're given or thinks you should be getting more coverage or whatever, because none of that stuff matters. What matters is that you give absolutely everything that you can to the cause that you're involved in at that time, that you can connect to that purpose, and everything else outside of that is really just noise. Maybe that's the case with the players, I don't know, but it would suggest to me that maybe it's just tiredness, maybe it's just the level they're at, maybe there's, they need a few extra players from, we'll say, 11 to 18, there's an interchangeable few there that mightn't be up to the full standard. But if you're waiting for, much like your work, as I was thinking about this earlier, much like your work out in Africa, if you're waiting for the powers who reinforce the structures to keep you in the position that you're in, because the ones at the top are always going to do that in every single walk of life, you're never going to get the thing that you want. What you have to do is you have to build it yourself. You have to build it yourself in the image that you want. And that's like rejecting the conformist kind of idea, or it's rejecting the conditioning of where the landscape is, in terms of where Galway are, where Wexford are, where Kerry are, where Wicklow are, where any team are. It's like rejecting that completely and saying we're going to set it out our way and we're going to create the future that we want.
Yeah, and I agree with you totally. And you've got to create your own narrative and not worry about the media's narrative. Look at Wexford, based on the last few performances in Leinster, based on the last few years coming in against Clare, haven't performed, I suppose, up to that standard. And Clare, similarly, last year or the last few years haven't been dining at the top table. But this year, there's a bit of manliness, there's a bit of a warrior spirit about them. They are defining their own narrative, where they rightly so were favourites going in against Wexford because of the performances they put up. They've had two outstanding performances against Limerick in the Munster Championship, two draws and an extra time, right? And there's a bit of fight. Their leaders are actually standing up, as Christy said. That point, I think, summarised the last 10 minutes. David McNerney caught a ball out of the sky, popped it to Tony Kelly. The burners on down the wing, found Shane O'Donnell, broke the tackle over the bar. Yeah, your three key players in a key moment swung it for them, as an example. Yeah. So that's where the players, and I remember, similar to your story, Clare Bridge, for example, we were poor us for 10 years. We won our first county title in 2001, and we wasted the next 10 years by accepting mediocrity, by no alignment, by no connection to a bigger purpose. You know what I mean? Micheál came in and he demanded the 6 or 7 leaders, 8 leaders, to stand up and drive it from within. We had to take account for it now. Nobody else could do it for us. And when you have the players driving the standards from within and driving each other and being self-policing and setting standards and not accepting mediocrity from each other or from the management, then you're going places because you own it. And when excuse the language, when it comes down to the melting pot or down to those final moments, because you're doing that day in, day out in training and you're conditioned to be that way, you're not going to accept it. And I think that's the big difference between the successful teams I was involved in and the unsuccessful teams was the key leaders did not accept mediocrity, and they set the standard, and they brought everybody with them, and they demanded that of each other, and they just would not tolerate mediocrity from anybody. And I think then that comes out in those critical moments, and then that's when we went then from nowhere to an old team in Clare Bridge, as Christy would know, to be All-Ireland champions in 2011. We came from nowhere because of that alignment together, that unity and that spirit and that unbreakable spirit, that player accountability, player driving the standards, players wanting it, and then you can go places you never thought you could go if you get that, and you get a good alignment with good management, good systems and structures in place, and obviously you need players as well to buy into that.
In your 20s, there's great opportunities, and you see now because of social media, you've got, like, we had friends in the early thousands who would have gone off and that have been all over the world, and we didn't have it in our face in the way that you would now. But you're seeing now the lives that people are leading in other places, and the draw is huge. I think it's reflective, possibly, Christy, you can shed some light on this. I was just reading a piece with Joe, actually, with Peter Duggan earlier, and then also Shane O'Donnell now. Maybe Shane's a different kettle of fish, I'm not sure. I know he has a lot going on, but when things are aligned in that way that Alan's talking about, I don't think anybody leaves. I think like very, very few. Nobody wants to leave, because anywhere you are in the world, it doesn't really matter. If you're part of something that's bigger than you, your own little small story, and it's headed a particular direction, there's no reason to leave. And maybe for two fellas of such a high caliber to leave Clare a couple of years ago, and then to have them back now, you know, they wouldn't go this year. I'd say nobody would go this year, because they see that things are going in a particular direction, and that's something that they want to be part of. So is that kind of testament to where they've arrived at this stage of, we'll say, Lohan's management, and as a bunch of players, they're now kind of, they've streamlined things, they know what they're at.
Yeah, well, I suppose just first of all, I suppose look at Peter Duggan. Peter was he waited a long time for his chance, right? He'd been on the panel in 13, but he didn't really establish himself until 18. Won an Ulster that year. Was probably one of Clare's better players in a poor 19 championship. So, like, there's been a kind of a history in his family of they've all travelled, right? So he wanted to do that. He did it. I don't think there was any issues. Like, that was kind of well known and clear at the time that, look, at this is just something this guy wants to do. Like with Shane, it was totally different. Like, he suffered a horrendous concussion at the start of he was in training at the start of last June, and like he went through. Like, I did a piece for him back in November, and he outlined, how bad it actually was. Like, that he said that when Clare played Waterford in the championship, the end of last June, he was literally out on a ride on lawnmower, sitting down with his headphones on a table beside him. That was about as much as he could take. He said when they played Tip a week later, he was watching the match in his sitting room, and all he said, he was watching his family watch the match, because he said he couldn't look at the TV. That's how bad the symptoms were. He went through a terrible time of it. Like, the big worry in Clare, I suppose, from Shane's perspective, was that, like, that it was more like, he said himself he'd no interest in hurling. It wasn't even on his radar that he'd come back with Clare. He just wanted to feel right. He said, when you're sick, the only thing you don't want anything else, only to be right. And I suppose, look, he didn't, he came back and he played for a Rogue last year in the championship, played really well. They got to the semi-final, were unlucky, beaten in the semi-final by only Kilnamona. He didn't play any, he said at the end of the year he was taking a break. He didn't play any Munster League games, didn't play any league games, and just, I suppose, found his, was in a place where he was happy that he could come back and play. So I suppose people are wondering, what kind of player would come back. But I suppose the one thing that's always defined Shane, he's incredibly brave. Like, was always a guy that, even as a young player with Flannans, with Clare, like, I actually was involved with Clare in the 16 team, and we had him corner back. But even, he was a really, really brave player. And, he moved up front after that. Was always one of these guys that, like, at times there was nearly criticism in Clare of Shane. He was too goal hungry, like that. He was always looking to take on his man and look for goals. And you can see that this year he's definitely changed his game. And I think he's kind of realised himself as well that he had to change his game after the injuries he suffered last year. So, he's out now. He's much more creative, winning a lot more frees, becoming more of a playmaker. Like, if you look at the last quarter, like, himself and Tony, like, they had 3 points from play, 3 assists, which is massive from two players that hadn't been playing well up to that point of the game by their standards. So, yeah, to go back to your original question, Diarmuid, I suppose, look, it's like the perfect storm. Like, Alan, you mentioned it there with Clarenbridge. Like, sometimes, things just happen where, other years you train really hard. Maybe certain players aren't operating at the same level. It just doesn't. You get a couple of bad results. You look at Clare 19, for example. They went down to Waterford and won down in Walsh Park in their first game. It looked like, they'd done all the hard work. They had 3 weeks off. They were in a really good position. They came along and they collapsed against Tip in their second game, got annihilated by Limerick in their third game, and all of a sudden the wheels come off. Like, so, and I suppose that's the one thing about the round robin that, especially with the timing of the games, whereby the whole thing can collapse in no time. And I suppose if you look at Waterford, for example, this year, a team that many people would have fancied to especially after the league final performance, would have expected them to maybe be Limerick's main challengers. But, like, the word on the ground after the Limerick game, when they lost that game, was that they trained. Cahill gamble that they trained really, really hard. They trained, Cahill and Mikey Beavens have always pushed those players hard. But they trained as hard in those 10-day period than they trained even when Cahill and Beavens first took over. And it was probably a bit of arrogance and a bit of, completely underestimating Cork in so many ways, because, they obviously felt that, look, this is a risk, but, Cork have lost their first 2 games. They're coming to Walsh Park. We should still be good enough to beat them. Instead of Cahill maybe saying, right, okay, let's just get Cork out of the way. Let's get a result. Cork are gone. We're through. And then maybe if we want to do a savage training window, we'll take it. So, you could argue that Cork season turned around on the back of poor decision making from Waterford. Like Waterford, you have to ask, why were they so flat? Why were they so poor against Cork? Why were they absolutely atrocious against Clare? Like, that's a malfunction. And you could argue that malfunction completely turns Cork season on its head. So all of this stuff goes on, Diarmuid. Nobody really knows what's going on in any camp. But for Clare, I think that it was just the first day against Tip was a real kind of a statement performance. They went out, a week later against Cork, backed it up, 2 away games, 2 home games to come. And, you just felt that, look at Clare in a really good place now. And then Limerick coming to town, really challenged themselves, see where they're at, took massive confidence from that. And then, going in against Waterford, left a lot of their big names on the bench. And a lot of these new guys came in and, as I said, David Fitzgerald, who'd been playing really well, scored, 2-3 from play that day. And all of these guys take confidence from that. And then you have a player like Tony Kelly, who's just on a different level, and guys follow him. And so look at from Clare, it just seemed to be that perfect storm. And even the Munster final, very, very disappointing. But the whole county was incredibly proud of the performance.
Yeah, at least
and I think
at least try to stand up.
The look at the last day, you'd have to maybe say that the Clare crowd effectively brought Clare home when the heat came on and they really needed to that backing and that support. Like the Clare crowd was incredible in the last 15 minutes.
I think one thing, Christy, there as well is that Clare mightn't have got credit for in the last few years is that some of the young talent that's coming through, they've really stood up. Like Ryan, James Ryan, Meehan.
James Ryan was outstanding.
And young Rory Hayes, Keane Nolan, they've come in and seamlessly transitioned into really solid and really.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing with that, Alan, is right. You can look at your own county, for example, and you look at, we'll say, what Galway have done at minor level in the last 30 years. You won a couple of minors yourself. I always make that comment about yourself. Probably one of the most standout stats in the history of the minor championship. Alan Kerins played and never pucked the ball once.
Fact of a goalie, didn't even puck it out.
Oh, what a stat! Thanks for bringing that one up, Christy.
But if you go back to, you look at Galway, Galway have actually won more on our minors in the last 30 years than Clare, Limerick, Waterford, Dublin, and Wexford in their history, right? Yeah. Which is banana stuff, right? But Galway haven't won under 20 or under 21 since 11. You look at Clare's modern history obviously 3 under 21s in a row, which is between 12 and 14, incredible stuff. But Clare haven't actually won an under 20 or under 21 match since 2015. Now, those guys you mentioned, like Dermot Ryan, Mark Rogers, Shane Meehan, Clare were very unlucky this year. Aidan McCarthy, a brilliant player, has been injured this year. All of those guys were on Clare under 20 teams. Some of them took unbelievable hammerings, right? But it's not Clare have proven that it's not all about winning under 20s and under 21s. That as long as you're getting one or two quality players.
I was actually saying that yesterday. I was down in Limerick yesterday at Galway Tip, outstanding minor match. Now Galway lost and they won't win it this year, but they have 2 outstanding talents in Rory Burke and Aaron Island who we hope will progress. And if you just get those 2 off, they hopefully get a lot more from that team. Yeah.
Well, if you get 1 or 2, if you get 3 or 4, you're doing fine.
You're doing brilliantly, and it's about just bringing 1 or 2 through rather than winning them.
Yeah. But I think Alan, on that, we'll say you're dead right. Look at it, the whole country, knows about Aaron. He's still under 16, incredible player. Rory Burke, brilliant player. But it's important now that Galway do bring through these guys. And if you even look at, we'll say, the minor teams that the Galway have produced in the last, they obviously won 4 in a row. But if you look at the team at the moment, it's actually it's dominated by the 15 minor team. You've Tom Monaghan, Fintan Burke, Concannon, Evan Nyland is
Ronan
there.
Glennon.
Exactly. Jack Fitzpatrick, Sean Loftus was there. He's not on the panel anymore. But maybe it's taken that long, Alan. And you were there. You were part of that cohort of brilliant underage minor players who were pulled off the production line, thrown in. Like how many of those guys? We won't mention names. How many of those brilliant underage, brilliant minor players were thrown in too early, not physically strong enough, almost chewed up and spat out by the system. Whereas now, I suppose you could say that you look at these guys now that it's maybe taken them until now to fully establish themselves. And the other thing, I suppose, that
is that being managed better, Christy? Sorry, it's an interesting point. Is that being managed better now, or are the demands just that much? Is it that much more physical, that much more fitness required that you can't really, bar the odd exception, you can't really bring players in at 18, 19, 20, even 21 in the way that you could?
Yeah, definitely, Diarmuid. Like we're saying, I suppose the one thing for me with Galway, right? Like Alan, you can come in on this here if you want in a second, but like to me, right? Like I've seen Galway minor teams, like their skill levels are just on a different universe to a lot of teams, right? But to me, right, that they're when you look at those players, maybe when they go to under 20, that sometimes their skill levels decrease. Their forward play decreases. Now I don't know, is that the S&C factor where you don't, like, skill will often override those issues at minor level because they're still young fellas are 16, 17. But like would say for Galway, like the you have to, said before, you have to measure everything at the moment on
Seniors.
Limerick because it's the power game. It's like absolute unbelievable physicality, power, relentless tackling, relentless turnovers. That's how Limerick, or that's what governs their play. So like, to be able to live in that world, you have to be able to survive in that world. So like, and maybe like I suppose when Galway won the All-Ireland in 17, they were a huge, physically strong team, right? Like all brilliant players who could hurl. But like if you look at that team, that forward line in particular, Johnny Glenn, like all of those guys, Joseph Cooney, like
Joe
even the guys
Canning,
off the bench, Jason Flynn,
Joe and Niall Burke, they were all, like, the average height was 6'1", 6'2", 6'3". They were all huge. They all could move and they all could hurl. I think with the Galway minor, the recent success we had in the minors, we haven't that height or that physicality of player coming through. The teams were very balanced, brilliantly skillful, but a lot of small guys. And sometimes,
but Alan, but just to go back to that point again, you look at the Limerick fellas now, right?
Yeah.
You look at the Clare lads, like they're big, strong men. Like Galway are. That's why I give Galway a great chance in 2 weeks' time, because like they're, and they're probably a team that Limerick, I'm sure would much prefer to have met Cork than Galway, because like you saw that in the league, like they can physically, even like Galway will be hoping that Garrod McInerney will be fit in 2 weeks' time. There's been maybe criticisms of Garrod over the last couple of years in terms of, but like you need a guy like that to go up against a Kyle Hayes or a
Garrod
McInerney, and even Fintan Burke on the other side, like he will physically stand up to Tom Morrissey. So like that maybe from a Galway perspective, maybe they set the standard and they set the bar in 17 by that power game. Like you look at Limerick now, they've taken it on to another level, and like Clare, as I said, that's the one reason, and Limerick knew after the round robin game in Munster that they knew that they could not physically bully or overpower Clare like they can to so many other teams left in the championship.
I suppose the one thing about Limerick is Galway probably should have beaten them in 18. They only played for a few minutes in 18. That big strong Galway team. Now we've lost Johnny Glynn, who's a huge loss, ball winner. You've lost Joe Canning, obviously one of the greatest of all time, and you've lost one or two more. And I think we've replaced them with that size or that strength. Yes, Whelan is outstanding and Connor, but they're not as big as the Limerick. And Limerick have stayed the same, literally the same team. Yeah. Excuse me, since that Galway have changed a little bit. So I think Galway, but the one big thing they have, as you said, Christy, they have a free shot now. And that they have a free shot of this, so there's no pressure, so they can go in and just fire the kitchen sink at this, and on any given day anything can happen. And you're right, they've always got up for Limerick. If you look at the 18 final, last puck of the ball, 2020, it was in the 70th minute they were level in the semi-final. This year in the league, I know it's the league, but they beat them. But Galway seem to get up for Limerick, so, and I suppose they have.
Alan, Clare proven as well, like you have to be able to physically match them, right? Like you've no business trying to take on Limerick. Would say like you try and run the ball if Cork found out to their detriment. Last August and back in April, like you're trying to run the ball through that middle third. You're not going to do it. It's not possible anymore. So like it's like. And like Kilkenny as well, when Limerick were last beaten, it was a Kilkenny team that physically just out-muscled them and got them into the trenches and just absolutely dogged them out of it. So, like, for all the talk as well, lads, about hurling and the standard, and it's at an incredible standard, like, but a lot of it, you look, would say, some of those numbers from the Munster final, like, would say, Seamus Flanagan, 8 points while he was in possession, when he scored those 8 points, he was in possession for 12.1 seconds. Tony Kelly, 7 points from play, within 17 seconds, 6 of those and scored in 10 seconds. Like Galan was on the ball like handful of times in the Munster final. Like that's the way the game has gone now. So like can you survive? Can you get possession? And I suppose that's what separates Kelly from everybody else. Like if you even look at the round robin game in May, like he'd 14 possessions. Like his first 5 possessions, he'd 4 points scored. And he's able to drift, like, you always feel that with Limerick, you're going to have to beat them in the half spaces, get them in between the lines, attack them, try and get in between those lines and run at them, because there is a lack of pace in their defence, especially in their half back line. But that's the great beauty of Limerick, is the way they set up. They don't let you run at them. They don't give you those chances. I think that's the one thing that Galway have to their advantage, is they have pace in their full back line. They've, and they have the power on the middle third, because if you're going to beat Limerick, that's what you need. And you even look at Clare, you need at least, you see it with Sean Finn, you need at least one high quality cornerback. And Clare have those guys now. They've, Rory Hayes, I know he's shipped 114 these last 2 games. That's probably part of the reason he was pulled on Saturday.
Is it? I was wondering about that. Is it that he was pulled? I think the word was that he was injured, but I got the sense that was Brian Lohan kind of putting down a bit of a marker to say, look, there's other things been happening off the field, and you've started in a particular way. You've gotten 2 or 3 balls. One of them was, totally reckless, and he just said, look, that's you're out. Your mind isn't in the right place. You're
suspension
gone.
Was playing on his.
Possibly, just in terms of preparation, it probably wasn't the ideal preparation. But I think he's also shipped a few scores. Like, there was a lot of talk about Rory Hayes at the start of the year, and you'd have to say, like, look, he's a young fella, and there's no doubt he's an outstanding career ahead of him. But I don't know that he get a little bit complacent and a little bit comfortable, and he's trying to play the ball out on the end line 5 yards from the goal. You're like, okay, Rory, that's great that you've had a great season, particularly in the round robin, but you are shipping scores, and there are times where you just have to burst out a little bit more.
Yeah, but it goes back to, like, yeah, exactly. I don't know, Diarmuid, if he was to do what it was to do with, like, but in fairness alone, he would be that ruthless, like, he'd say, look at this guy, he's shipped 114 these last 2 games, 1-6 off Desi Hutchinson, 8 points off Seamus Flanagan. But the other thing is, you look at Paul Flanagan, like, Paul Flanagan has been absolutely brilliant, right? And
what a renaissance time for him. He's really just been outstanding, hasn't he?
Brilliant fella.
That goes back to a point we spoke about earlier, lads, in terms of, Lohan showing faith in these guys. Like Paul, captain the minor team in 2010. And has come back in now 28, 29, and has been unbelievable, brilliant. Like, so, but he just proves as well, you need at least one brilliant cornerback now with the way the game has gone. And Clare have 2 or 3 of them, which is great.
Yeah, there's a high standard in the game at the moment. Christy, I have this image of you outside of Ennis or wherever you are with an old tape recorder or an old video recorder, and you're pressing play and then pause and then rewind, and you're counting up all of these seconds. The fellas wearing the bras, this is where all of this is worthwhile, is it? Where they send the information and you get to see it. Tony Kelly had it for 18 seconds, or how does this happen that you know that level of detail?
Just to be honest, it was a piece I did for the Examiner last week, Diarmuid, whereby it just struck me, like, we'll say, that the Munster final, that, like, some of the numbers were just ridiculous. Like, I think it was the first 15 minutes, I think players had possession of the ball for 1 minute and 29 seconds.
And how do you know that? This is what I'm wondering. How do you know that? How do you know it was that? Like,
just literally, I Sky Plus, I literally have my phone out, I press play. Okay, Tony Kelly has the ball in possession.
In this age of technology, I would just assume that this was like information.
That's the stats man, Christy. No,
lock it on a stopwatch, write it all down, add it all up.
My God,
it's that basically basic. And look, I've always been big into stats, like, but I think a lot of this stuff is fairly basic. Diarmuid, when you're, and I suppose for me, really, the biggest I've always felt like when you're crunching numbers and when you're collecting data or you're collating data, like, the most important thing is that you make it in such a way that the reader can digest it. There's no point putting a load of numbers down a page because a lot of people know with their attention spans, they just don't have
with their broken attention spans. I suppose it has to be useful. That's the best way to make it digestible, isn't it? It's like, well, what purpose does this serve? Like, I certainly, when I see Tony Kelly had the ball for 8 seconds and I see him dominating a game, or he has the ball for 25 seconds in total in a game, and you think he's after running the whole show for the whole thing, you think he might have it for much longer, and it would highlight for me, okay, this is how important it is to make the most of every single possession that you have, because a game, you're literally breaking down your own contribution on the ball. I mean, there's loads of contribution you make off the ball, but on the ball you're talking about between 15 and 30 seconds.
Yeah, but I think Kevin Walsh has had that line. He had that line in his book about like the most you're probably going to have possession for is 1 minute in a match, right? And he's talking about football. So what are you doing for the other 69 minutes? And if you look at the Munster final, Barry Nash was the longest in possession, 54 seconds. Brilliant player, very creative. A guy who scored 7 points in play in the under-21 final against Wexford in 15 when he was still under 19. That's the way the game has gone now. Like that, that he attacks, he identifies pockets of space, he identifies gaps, he attacks them. Very creative in how Limerick, he's massive in how Limerick work that ball through the midfield platform. But you could say the players who have are longest in possession now are probably the cornerbacks, the guys who are taking the short puck out, because once you get it up to up or higher up the field, it's a war trying to win it. But I think there definitely has been a change. It's been a bit of a throwback, and I'd even throw this one back out to Alan like that. It's I think this year it's been a bit more. I think people have realised that you can't run this ball through the swarm, as Cork found out to their cost in the round robin game and back in April. That it's been a bit more man on man. Win your own ball, win your own battle, try and survive in that. Just war physicality, and I think that's why Clare have done so well, and that's why maybe the likes of Cork have struggled. Now I do think, in fairness to Cork, that they have shown a lot. They did show a lot in last Saturday. That there was definitely more work rate. But I suppose their struggles again, like in the first half, their forwards at 23 possessions. Their main guys like Lehane, Harnedy, who'd been playing really well, were just out muscled by Galway. Just didn't. Like Lehane had 2 possessions in the first half. Harnedy 1 shot. Lehane coming into the game at a shot involvement of 10 points per game, which was his story. In fairness to Conor, I think it should be acknowledged.
It's been outstanding for sure.
I don't know if we'll see him again in a Cork jersey, but to come back this year to hit the levels that he hit, it looked like he was on the scrap heap last year. He was dropped off the Cork panel at the end of 2020. I think it'd be a shame if Conor goes out on that and he's remembered for that, because I think his renaissance this year has to be commended, and he deserves so much credit for the way he came back and performed at such a high level.
Do you see Galway going man to man? I mean, I definitely think you can learn from the weekend, even looking at Wexford and Clare, that idea and the possibility and the necessity against Limerick for the swarm in the middle third in particular, and how effective that was for Clare. And it seems like if you played that man at the back, like you look at Clare coming out, they were able to dance the ball out far too often. They had 3 yards, and you got up and you isolated someone like Ian Galvin on Jenny, our own fullback, Liam Ryan. He had isolated on Liam Ryan, and Liam can't go fully in because there's the potential that he'd be burned if he's out on the wing. And if you've dropped that man back and you try to protect, which is understandable against Limerick, it's much harder to swarm up top and stop that quality ball going through. So I imagine that's what Galway will do. That they'll have to push up. Like,
I think they will. And look, no matter what you do at Limerick, they can do it both ways. You see that, they can work it through the lines. Brilliant at that. They've brought that to the game over the last number of years. And like you have the likes of Hegarty and Tom Marcy, who can shoot from distance, and Diarmuid Burns now has got loads of points. So it doesn't make a difference to Limerick at this stage what way you do it. I think you've got to just man up. You've got to win those dirty balls. Like, you got to get in their faces. You got to bring that swarm to them and put them under as much pressure like Clare did.
That it is in you, like that kind of Western ignorance, like, you know, that willingness for hard work. Like it's certainly not beyond you. Is that if the tempo? I don't know. Has that Galway team gone to the line in the way like Wexford learned against Clare? Like, you know, the last 5 or 6 minutes, things kind of fell apart systematically because probably they hadn't been in that intensity of a game really yet. I know they were intense against Limerick or against Kilkenny, but it was a bit different. I wonder what Galway how long can they do that for? You know.
We don't know, because this year, I suppose, they're on the back of a very poor Leinster final performance. They weren't shooting the lights out in Leinster either. They struggled over Wexford, struggled over Kilkenny in Pearse Stadium. Yes, they had a few decent wins in the round robin, but they were quite poor in the Leinster final.
Yeah,
they hadn't that intensity. They're very lethargic. Henry was just disappointed in the level of performance. And the last day, you have to say, Cork blew it.
That's the thing. You know, everyone was saying before, do you expect an answer? And I expected Galway to beat Cork, to be honest, because I haven't seen it from Cork. What maybe is expected?
What I would look at, Cork missed 3-12, you know, according to all the stats.
Yeah,
Galway didn't, and they got a really soft goal. Galway with unfortunately for Patrick Collins dropping into the net.
Yeah,
like 2 of those Cork goals should have been finished. Like Gerald Fitzgibbons won 1-on-1.
Yeah,
Connolly the one. He could have gone a lot further. He hit it way too early because Daithí slipped behind him.
Yeah.
They had 12, a lot of easy frees. Connor missed a good few easy frees early doors. And then, you know, you'd have to say that if they converted even a third of those chances, they'd probably won. They'd won 4 or 1-5 extra on the board. They're going in 6 or 7 up at half time. It's a different game then.
Yeah.
So I know that Galway would be delighted with the win to get over it, and the second half was a lot better. Definitely was a lot better, and they toughed it out and they won it when it mattered, and they stood up when it mattered, which was great. So they need to bring that second half performance to the table big time and go way beyond that if they are to challenge Limerick at all. But as I said, it's a free shot and they can happen in sport, and they do get it up for Limerick, and they have certain players who can bring that physicality, and if they can set the tempo early doors, Croke Park outwork them, outmuscle them. It's going to come down to that. Outwork them, outmuscle them, outrun them, get in their faces. You know, Limerick are on the go a while. You know, surely Galway can have a bit more hunger than them. That's the hope, but
it's hard.
They haven't shown that yet. That level of performance that Clare have shown. Would you agree with me, Christy, in that in terms of the performances? We haven't seen that level of aggression, that level of energy, that level of work rate that will be needed. Now, hopefully, that can change. In Croke Park, and that will bring it out of them. No better man than Henry. He's one of the greatest of all time to bring that level of work rate and attitude and application.
Yeah, well, it's interesting though. I wonder sometimes when you're dealing with fellas who can't do what you do instinctively, how much Henry can understand why they can't do what he expects anybody to be able to do. That remains to be seen. He was obviously well able to do it with Ballyhale, but I haven't seen it gel, and I haven't seen that. There definitely seems to be something that they're holding back, and I'm just wondering why it's not coming out, and this is what we want to see against Limerick. You know,
it's in the first year or two, I suppose, you only get to know the players and management, and
time,
blooding a lot of young players. And talking about the younger players there, what a time to be a young Galway player coming into a setup with that setup there, and with the calibre of individual he has. Damien Joyce, a great fella, brilliant fella, Henry himself, and he's got a great
Damien Joyce, the only fellow with a 6-pack on his back. My God, he played in New York.
And he still has that. He still has that.
I've never seen a fitter inter-county hurler.
And a brilliant fella with it as well. One of the
brilliant fella,
genuine guys you'll ever meet.
Played against him in New York. And smashing fella. Christy, do you see anything in Galway, or how do you think Galway will set about taking Limerick down?
Yeah, look, as Alan has kind of summed it up there, is he like, you know, like everything he spoke about, like Galway have that, you know, they have that in their locker, like that they have that, I suppose, look at, and they have, like, look at, they have, like, obviously you're very reliant on Conor Whelan, right? Like, brilliant player. Oh, even look at Conor's numbers the last day, like I think he had 6 possessions, you know, like the goal in the first half was unbelievable the way, you know, he got in.
And his 2 points were brilliant as well from tight angles.
Points, like, you know. But like if you look at the Leinster final, for example, like I suppose Galway's performance ultimately collapsed on the back of the poor service into him. Like, I need a goal chance, you know, early in the second half, and I think that was his last shot in the game. Like, you know, he 10 possessions in that game. But like, you know, I think the last day, you know, even though he worked unbelievably hard, like, and Kieran Joyce was sitting back kind of deeper after the after Whelan's point in early in the second half. But like Galway, I suppose that their long range shooting really it was really, really good the last day.
Yeah.
And you're going to need that against Limerick, because you can't be completely reliant on Conor Whelan to take down Limerick on his own. Now, Brian Concannon played really well against Limerick in the 2020 semi-final. Cathal Mannion showed really good form the last day, especially in patches. Cathal has probably struggled to find the form that he's capable of reaching. So, like Galway have enough shooters. They have a goal threat, right? Especially in Whelan. Now, I suppose he scored the goal the last day, something that he hadn't done up in the championship to date. But to beat Limerick at this stage, you need goals, right? Clare didn't get any in the Munster final. I suppose Cork probably, based a lot of their game plan on trying to take down Limerick on trying to get goals. It's just a lot harder to do than as we said earlier about the way they just don't give you those chances. Like Waterford got close to them because they got 2 goals in Limerick in the round robin. So yeah, Galway, but the big thing is that they have the power and they have the physicality, and I think they have the confidence as well that they have no fear of Limerick traditionally, historically. They've beaten them in league games, and that I think as you mentioned, Alan, they owe Limerick one as well. Like from the awful lot of hurts in 2018 from. Galway didn't play at all. Yeah. Really, really poor performance. And still could have actually won the game at the very end if that ball, like Joseph Cooney, let fly in that ball that Joe dropped in, could have gone in. And if that, you could argue if that had gone in, Limerick would never have been heard of again because they probably never have recovered from it. So, I just think that from Galway's perspective, they look forward to this. I wouldn't say it's a free shot, Alan, because, a team with this amount of experience, they're not going into an All-Ireland final with only one thing on their minds, only winning it. But I do think that Galway have a much better chance than maybe a lot of people think.
Yeah, what I mean by a free shot is they're going in as underdogs. They're going in as Limerick are coming in as overwhelming favourites, so they can, as in, there's no pressure.
They can throw off the shackles.
They can throw off the shackles and go for it.
I think the other thing as well, lads, is that you'd have to say that. Limerick are probably creaking a small bit, which you saw in the Munster final. They're incredible. Incredible levels, right? They've Keane Lynch come back.
I don't know if I saw that, but I take the point. There's a team come closer to him.
Okay, it's another big game, right there. It's another that Munster final, extra time. We've seen it with. I suppose that was the one thing with Kilkenny. They were able to Kilkenny were a superb team, but when they were at their peak, right, and when they were winning all those All-Irelands, they really had to get it right for 2 games. They'd stroll through Leinster, right, in most years, especially back around, in the during the 4 in a row,
take it easy,
get it right for semi-final, eat 2 games, really. No disrespect to Wexford.
No, geez, none taken there on that one.
Whereas with Limerick now, they've had to go to the well, they've had to extra time in the Munster final. Clare gave them enough for it in the park.
A few weeks to a break will do them the world of good, I'd say as well, would it?
Yeah, they've had the break, but it's just all of these games, you've seen it, that they do, Keane Lynch's injury, they've withstood that, but if they get another big injury, can they? Obviously there's no question they're favourites and absolute, favourites to win the All-Ireland, but all of this stuff adds up, and maybe even with the 4-week break, they do need the 4-week break, but there's actually, if you look at won't get into it now, but if you look at the history of the Munster champions coming in after a 4-week break, the stats are there, they're not good, go back, okay, they didn't have that in the last few years with the way the championship was more condensed than winter championship. But if you look, you saw it in 19, they had a 4-week break, they came in, they were caught cold. If you go back over the last 15 years prior to that, I think the Munster champions had won 4 out of 11, or it was 4 out of 15 fixtures coming in cold. So there's all of that stuff that maybe will add up and will be into Galway's favour as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously we're clutching at straws in some respects, trying to find chinks in the armour. They seem to come out of the Clare game. John Kiley listened to him afterwards, strengthened because they had managed the onslaught. A team had come to their level and they were still able to get the win. But you're looking for all of these possibilities. A couple of quick ones. One, Christy, for you actually, I'd say in relation to the goalkeepers. I had there's a fella on to me earlier on. I just put a call out to say that you were on the show today and that they were asking about the goalkeepers. Now I'm going to add my own little piece to his question, I suppose. But looking at Mark Fanning's mistake and I suppose Ivor Quilligan and Patrick Collins as well, Is there a movement? It may be just knee jerk. That's just maybe a freak that happens. Once every 20 years. I don't know where it would happen in at that extent in games. But goalkeepers as game managers versus goalkeepers of the caliber of Davy Fitzgerald, of Damien Fitzhenry, of Brendan Cummins, of Don Logue or whatever, shot stoppers and goalkeepers with all of the the goalkeepers, the ball would roll in, and if somebody looked at him wrong, like they'd be out trying to fight him, and the goalkeepers have that edge, like, and now you've got this kind of game management is much more to the fore. Is there a shift there, or is it just just a freak?
Yeah, look, it's just one of those days, I'd say, like you'd feel like, from being there myself, Alan, you play there in 94, it's like the worst position in the world. Like, I suppose just like for Pat Collins in particular, like that first, like you're talking about a nightmare scenario for a goalie, like that's it in a nutshell. Like the game is on 20 seconds, your first touch, that's all you worry about is get a good first touch, high ball ends up on the net. Like I suppose the free from the Mark Fanning free, like, that ball from Aver's perspective, like dangerous ball, like coming in where, you're pretty caught in two minds where, you're half expecting the flick, you're kind of maybe mentally prepared for that, and then the ball just hops and didn't get his body behind
definitely yeah,
that was a tricky one. Just it's like going back to the game management that we spoke about earlier on about the time on the ball. Is that's why the goalies are so important now, in terms of they are the quarterbacks. They're the one player on the pitch that actually has time to make that decision.
Work out strategies.
The decision making is so much harder because all you see when you look out is screens, hurleys up, block channels, block channels of space, and Limerick have completely changed all that narrative as well, and how they set up and how they hunt that short puck out. So like it's
So you think goalkeeping is still the goalkeeping is still fine? I suppose it's following the same as the same trajectory as the game. The touch control is 10 times better.
Murphy, and even look at Éanna Murphy.
Éanna Murphy certainly came out higher. For you, Alan, one of the things, I suppose, was a lot of talk last week. Your own man Keenan Fahy was involved in an incident at Crow Park, and then they picked out two of the clips from the Clare Limerick game as well, and I don't know, whatever way people want to think about the way suspensions work, or whether the Sunday game should pull them up or they shouldn't, and then the CCC has to get involved or whatever. That's all fine, but there's something for me in the spirit of those things that going to a disciplinary meeting in Crow Park, or going to a disciplinary meeting online, or whatever way it happens, and getting off on a technicality. I think it's one of the flaws of the justice system outside of the game, like in real life, where it's like, oh, you spelled the name wrong, or you didn't write down the right road. And if you've done the thing, you've done the thing. Like I don't. It kind of breaks my heart to see it go. Like for that to be the precedent that was set, like, is to say, oh, we got off on a kind of a technicality.
Old-time politics.
Like, hang on there now. Like this happened. We're looking at it. We saw it. This is it. It was on camera. This is what we think should be done. That's that. And then you've got this other
loopholes, movement
towards the law, and this decision by people in courtrooms outside of our game. And it frustrates. I was happy. Didn't care about the lads playing. Whoever they're going to put instead are going to be as good anyway. But just to see that coming in. And from my own, I had an experience of going to Crow Park myself before for a disciplinary meeting, and kind of being feeling that kind of courtroom kind of a feeling. It was just like, I don't know, is this the right direction? Maybe it's necessary. I don't know. But
I think it's. I'm not going to talk about the suspension, but I think it's a joke how people can get off if you did it.
Yeah,
it's there in black and white. How do rugby get it right? I think rugby get it right, don't they? And if they're going to cite people, then they should have a committee that like what rugby do. You're cited. Everyone is cited, not just trial by TV, right?
I think that's a paid, they go through the whole game and they're refereeing the game after the fact and they shout.
But they seem to be when you get cited in rugby, you're cited and you're banned. That's it.
Yeah.
But in the GA, there's so many loopholes and so many rules and so many ways of getting out of it. Like you said, the kind of old time kind of politics where that kind of cute tourism is it? Getting out of stuff, which is. Yeah, if you did it, you did it. Like, I know if I suppose when you're in a situation yourself, you try it yourself. But
sure,
but
this is so that's.
But it is something they need to look at, really, isn't it, Christy and yourself?
It needs to be tidied up a little bit,
big time, because for consistency as well. And then if they're going to cite people, everyone should know they're going to be cited, or
Yeah.
the possibility of cited, not just by trial by TV.
Yeah.
And they obviously can learn from rugby what they've done if they want it in place. If they don't, that's fine.
Yeah.
But there needs to be consistent. They need to make a decision on it, and then you need to tighten it up big time.
Yeah, I think I'd bring in the something from the Aussie rules as well, which is they cite players for faking injury.
Okay. Yeah.
For overacting and stuff like that. They'll say afterwards that's a too much ban because it's not in the spirit of the game. It's like the committee. That's what I feel. That's what the committee should be for, to kind of protect the spirit of the game more so than
and that's protect
the legal loopholes. Like that's not what it's for. Like, you know, I mean,
I agree with
ideally,
you. I agree with you. It's important that we play sport because we're sportsmen, and we love sport. But when you see things like that, which are not sportsman-like, I suppose, it does goes against why we play it, especially as amateurs as well. And we're representing our county and our community, and it does go against the ethos of the game itself.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
one point on that.
Go on, Christy.
That's why, you know, like the John Milan, you know, incident in 2004 is often, you know, such a reference point for stuff like this, because you know, like, it's just kind of the Irish mentality. Like, you know, we'll try and pull a fast one, and you know, there's so many loopholes there, and we'll go to the DRA, and sure, look, we'll get some guy to put up the cash to cover those costs and all of this stuff. And like, in fairness to Clare now, the last two, like, they had kind of accepted that the two boys were gone, and you know, they did, you know, I think that within the squad that they were moving on straight away. But there is, like, but that's the problem, Alan, as you said, about that there's so many committees, there's loopholes there. There's a chance to maybe, you know, wriggle yourself out of this. And sometimes, you know, that there is a need whereby, you know, as you said about the poor me mentality, where, you know, you have to just say, right, we've got to accept this now and move on with it. And I think but you know, when you have that mentality which is there, and you know, you're trying to get off, and I suppose the attitude then is, well, look at, you know, a couple of our players got picked out. Why didn't the other guys get picked out? It's not fair. And all of this kind of leads into that narrative, and that's why I suppose, you know, everyone's trying to get one over on the other crowd, you know.
But that's why, if they're doing that, they should have an overall committee that does it like rugby. And
it's looking like it's
non-biased.
It's looking like it'll need to be tidied up anyway, because it's a little bit too uncertain at the moment. Look at, lads, we could go on for another while, no doubt. We're looking forward to Kenny, Clare, Limerick, Galway. There's predictions and everything else, but sure, look at I think it's another day's work in some respects. Cheddar Plunket has gone from the Laois job, and also, I guess, the biggest story, I think, that puts everything into perspective of what was of the GA community this week was in Tyrone. And I never met Damien Casey, but you know, you always get the feeling when you see this of the brotherhood of the game, like of the fellas who are playing, and you feel like you've gone through something with them, because you know that they've gone through what you've gone through, and it's just and I suppose as a human being outside of the game anyway, like, you just be heartbroken for the story that's come out of Tyrone in the last week, and our condolences to all of Tyrone GA and to Damien's family. We'll leave it there. A somber note to leave it on, but it's a tough story for Tyrone, for someone such a celebrated hurler, and a loss to all of us, a loss to the game. Christy, thanks very much for being in and joining us and bringing your statistics. You can go back to the recorder now and get the Sky Plus and get the stopwatch out. It's great to have you. It's good to know that that's the way things work.
We're the kids in, eh?
And Alan, look at it. It's always great to be in your company.
Thank you.
It has always been very enjoyable. So thanks very much for making it come in. That's all we have time for. When we'll be back next week in the aftermath of, we're just down to the last 4 teams. Back 3 games left, and we'll be back to digest the All-Ireland semi-finals next Monday. Thanks very much.